Welcome to Hashtag Analytics, a conversation between two individuals, one that's super passionate and one that's super opinionated, both around the topic of analytics.
I'm Luke Stenke. I'm a analytics professional by day and a professional Twitter troll by night. I'm the facilitator of Workout Wednesday, and you can follow me on Twitter at Luke Stenke, and my website is stenke.co.
Hi, I'm Ann Jackson. I'm an analytics evangelist. I run my own consulting firm. You can find me at jackson2.com for blog posts, insightful things, and on Twitter, you can find vizzes, cat pictures, cat emojis. Luke, who is our guest with us today?
Yeah, today we've got Adam McCann. He's the director of analytics at Kimi. You can find him on Twitter at Adam McCann, and he's got an awesome blog, duelingdata.com. Adam, welcome.
Thanks, Luke. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be your first guest.
Yes. You are our first guest, so this is very exciting for us.
Our topic is generally going to be about attribution. It's been a very hot topic in the Tableau community, and I think it's just in general a great topic for all things data visualization and analytics.
So Adam, I think maybe a great way to start would be, what does attribution mean to you? If you had to define it and explain it to someone else, what would you describe it as?
So to me, it's simply acknowledging credit for something. When you were either inspired by someone, or you borrowed a technique from someone, or you outright took a visualization from someone and maybe filled it with different data. I think all of that is considered fair attribution. There's a gray line as to where you attribute work or where you're stealing work, but I think all of that is pretty fair attribution. I think once you start taking things that aren't yours and not attributing credit, or not communicating where you got it from, that is where it becomes plagiarism or theft or something more serious.
What's interesting is when I was kind of doing some research about this topic and looking into attribution, it kind of comes more from like copyright and authorship, which I think is a little bit of a gray area when we talk about analytics. Some things that I'm kind of drawn to that I think could maybe be ripe for attribution would be something more around a design. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think design and color schemes and similar types of visualizations, I think being inspired by someone and mimicking that technique with new work, as long as you, one, do your own work and create something new, and two, if you were truly inspired by someone, you give credit. I think that's all fair. Colors are a thing I really struggle with because I'm colorblind, so I tend to borrow colors from a lot of people, or use a color palette generator, things like that. Or use defaults. But when I do borrow color palettes from someone, I either give credit or reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm gonna borrow this color palette." But that's one area where I do think it's fair to borrow as long as you're giving credit for where credit is due.
Let's take a look at the code of conduct that Tableau put out. They kind of highlight 5 key areas. 1, be kind. 2, treat others with respect. 3, a big one, which we're talking about now, is give credit where credit is due. 4 is a very interesting one, which is search for understanding, which is like, obviously in general conversations, we're not even talking about attribution of work, but like find out why someone's doing what they're doing or thinking what they're thinking, and then come to a common understanding regardless of that. I think that's a really hard one when we're talking about attribution, of like, search for understanding of why someone might have just lifted your work, or someone might be, and that's sort of like a really emotional thing, right? Something taken from you, and someone just blatantly says it's theirs, or they don't acknowledge that it's yours. It's really hard to meet in the middle, and especially when you're searching for understanding. And then the last one, of course, is share your knowledge and ask questions. I think that is kind of maybe speaks to the fact of like, we're going to put something out there. Let's put a blog post out there so that people understand the difficulty that goes around it. And hopefully they learn from that rather than just doing a straight lifting of the work.
Yeah. The searching for understanding is an interesting piece, because I do think, in my instance, someone took some of my work and posted on their website and listed it as a service that they provide. And that made me angry. And so I reached out to the individual and it wasn't maybe the kindest way of communicating with them. But I was angry that he had stolen my work. So I reached out to him directly. And then I communicated on Twitter that this person had stolen my work. Someone had pointed out, I think it was Sophie Sparks formerly from Tableau, pointed out that maybe there's a miscommunication. Maybe this is not considered as egregious in certain places as it is in where we're from, where I'm from, and I I understand that, and I think it's a fair point for maybe to show a little more empathy as to why some people might do something. But I don't. I do think in this individual case, the person knew what they were doing was wrong, and they just thought they can get away with it. But certainly bringing more understanding and trying to see someone's perspective, I could have done a better job of that. But like Luke said, I just responded sort of angrily.
I think that's completely, I mean, I would probably do the same thing, and it's hard to keep a level head. I think you brought up an interesting point. Well, when Sophie responded, I had to check myself. I was like, I know that I responded. I believe in the sense that it's definitely plagiarism. And then is it a cultural context? And I immediately started researching, all right, what are the acceptable levels of plagiarism around the world? And while there is a lot of plagiarism that happens around the world, generally every country, plagiarism is plagiarism. When you take something, people know that it's not theirs and that there are laws around. I mean, if we're just talking the general context of it, it happens, and it is, people don't find it as acceptable. So it's not like we're trying to put a cultural context around it, and I think it's understandable that we look through that lens, but in the end, it is what it is, and it's not an acceptable practice by any means.
Let me ask you guys this question. So from my understanding of the situation, it was kind of used as a way to demonstrate a certain level of skill in a domain to make money, right? That's kind of how I interpreted it. If it's clear that they just have it somewhere, they're not making money off of it, they're not broadcasting it, they're just trying to learn, and maybe they're not necessarily actively attributing your name to something, but does it cross the line when someone is misrepresenting themselves as part of the process and particularly making money off of it?
Yeah, I think, earlier this week, someone pointed out that someone had posted my Beatles viz, or not some, a few people had posted my Beatles viz to their Tableau public profile. And someone had asked, does this bother me? And to be honest, it doesn't bother me at all. It's, they're not tweeting out, hey, look what I built. They're not communicating, most of these folks only have one or two visits on there. They had left my name on it. I think most of that is just, they're trying to learn, and a lot of folks don't have desktop on their machine. So they're saving it. I don't know why they would save it to the cloud. They could just re-download it, but maybe they did some work to it, or maybe they put some notes in it. I don't know. But I consider that harmless because they're not trying to take credit for it. They're not advertising themselves. And there's certainly not a price tag next to the work, which is what the instance I was referring to earlier. But I will say, other people have had issues with that, where they found their work reposted to Tableau Public by other people, and it bothered those individuals. And I understand why they were upset, because it is your portfolio. It's essentially, for a lot of folks, it's your resume. I'm hiring for a position right now, and I ask them to send me their Tableau Public page. And if I see stuff on there, actually one of the people that emailed me, they had a viz that didn't belong to them on their website or on their public profile. And they had the original author's name on it. But I wonder how many people would have noticed that. So it's weird. Tableau Public's a different beast. And so I can understand when people get mad and see their work on other people's profile.
I think it comes down to when you're you're almost taking the likeness of someone else, right? Adam did all this work. I know that it's happened to Bridget in the past, and it happens to a number. It's guaranteed to be out there and happening to others. But it's when you're trying to describe something as your own that it's clear that someone else did. I think that's the delineator. Again, as you said, Tableau Public is its own beast. That is people are learning on that platform, and that's how I see it. but it's as soon as someone is staking claim as their own is probably the key differentiator there. I think we're all in agreement. We're just violently agreeing on the same thing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think having that kind of openness and sharing platform has more positives than negatives? I mean, the positives being, I can download your work, I can learn from what you're doing. Maybe the byproduct of that is I have something of yours on there. Or do you think, there's the negative of that being like, you are truly a great practitioner of it. Are we now overestimating a lot of people's skills in the same domain by allowing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I try to think generally people are trying to do the right thing. And so I think the benefits of Tableau Public are far outweigh the very few instances where people abuse the privilege or abuse the platform and more importantly, the community. So, it's an awesome community. When people's stuff gets stolen, the community responds and is very supportive. I think the only fear is, and this isn't something that's in my mind, but the only fear is that if people are so upset with people stealing their work, that they might they might lock down their workbooks, prevent it from being downloaded, not share it publicly at all. And that's when it becomes negative, because I think, and Tableau would, I think, agree with this, the differentiator between them and their competitors is the community, at least in big part. I mean, it's a great piece of software, and that's why the community is there, but it's the collaboration, the passion in the community is a big part of how they sell themselves. And so for them to lose that would be hard. And I think that's why you saw the response in the code of conduct policy come out. But, it never would turn me off if I see, this has happened before. People stole my stuff before. It happens. It would never turn me off from sharing my stuff or making my workbooks downloadable. But if I were a freelancer and, and I was selling, my services for X dollars an hour, and then someone were to steal my work and then sell it for significantly less because they didn't earn it, or whatever reason they can afford to sell their services less, then that would really bother me. It would hurt my bottom line. But, I have a different job and a different, my career isn't dependent on my Tableau Public portfolio. So
I think it's really important to point out that what you do is out of it's a passion project and work that you're doing. It's not, you don't, on the day-to-day, you're not sitting in Tableau and developing in Tableau. You're doing something completely different. So anything that you're producing is just as something that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah. Most of my job's spent in R, quite frankly, or other places. I do a decent amount of Tableau work, but it's not the bulk of my work. I do it because, like Luke said, it's fun and I enjoy it. It is my hobby. So it's, if I were Steve Wexler and I was putting a lot of, Steve is, a model person in the community, in my opinion, because he's a freelancer, and he's always shared a lot of things, and nobody does survey data visualization better than Steve, in my opinion. And he shares all this freely. And so, and he does that maybe, I don't know, but maybe at the expense of his bottom line. And he's written books, he's known in this field, but he freely and willingly shares a lot of his work. And if I were Steve and I had my work stolen, I probably would have responded more aggressively than I did, because it would impact my bottom line directly. And I think that a lot of people don't think of that.
I'm exactly the person you're describing, right? So, I do have my own consulting firm. You could even call it freelance at this point, right? I have separate public portfolios for each one, right? I have my person, who I am as an individual. It's very encompassing of the hobbies, the weird visualizations that I built that aren't, me trying to entice a business owner, a business user to work with me, right? But then I do have that professional portfolio that is locked down from that perspective. It's an important distinction, right? Some people are purely on Tableau Public for fun, and some people are on it to make money. Some people are on it to do both.
Yeah. I think I do think you have to recognize that there are many different types of people who are using Tableau. Some are using it purely as a portfolio. Like, this is the stuff I do at work, but I can't share it, so I'm going to make a portfolio to do that. That's not really why I use it. Some people are using it as you use it to communicate your services and what you can do, and then some people are just messing around and making silly visualizations like I do. So when someone steals something, you have to understand why they respond, other than that they don't like being treated that way. But there might be a bigger reason why people respond that way.
So I want to pivot this conversation a little bit. And one of the other things I've noticed around attributions, I think, directly stealing someone's work where it's an exact copyright. Like you could almost think of it as like a picture. That's one thing, but there's a much more nuanced type of, I'll say theft, right? Type of thing that happens where someone will develop a technique or a concept or maybe a particular chart. And I've seen varying degrees of, hey, you should make sure you attribute, XYZ because they're the first person. Like, let's attribute jitter to Steve Wexler maybe because he's the first person who ever thought about it. Yeah. So I think, can we kind of talk about that? And what are your guys' opinions and thoughts on if you are inspired by someone's technique, or maybe you come up with it independently, does it merit the same amount of attribution?
So I don't think so. So, I have a few things that I've created how to make a gauge in Tableau, or how to make a radar chart in Tableau, and a few other silly things. And I've seen people reproduce it, and some people give credit and some people don't. Like Andy did the Financial Times amazing thing that he put out last week on how to create all these visualizations in the style of Financial Times. And one of the things he borrowed was from me on radar charts, which I had forgotten about. And it was nice. He gave attribution to me and the other folks that he had borrowed the technique from, which was really nice. But he certainly didn't have to do that. I don't. I think that's the role of a Zen master or whatever, is the role of someone in the community, is to share it. Where it goes from there, I don't have much control over. Mm-hmm. The only problem I do have is so I had this occur to me before and I handled it differently, but I had someone stole a technique I put on my public profile, but I never wrote a tutorial on how to do it. It was a stupid little thing. And then I noticed someone wrote a tutorial on how to do it, how to create it. And they didn't give me credit. They didn't say where they had gotten it from. And then I downloaded their workbook, and it was indeed my technique. And that bothered me. Not because it was my technique and they had borrowed it or inspired, but because they claimed it was something they had invented, or not invented, but something they had developed on their own. And I emailed that individual privately, and we went back and forth a little bit, but ultimately I wasn't pleased with how that was handled. So that's why I handled this one different. The most recent case where someone stole my stuff differently and was more public about it, more direct, was because I think I'd gotten burned in the last time. But I think that's wrong when you claim a technique is your own, or that you developed it independently, and that's easily traceable. It's easily provable that it's not true. But I think, if someone makes a Sankey chart and then you develop a similar Sankey chart, or you get inspired, and it's hard to trace back, like, Chris Love did this part, and then, Jeffrey Schaefer did that part, and, Luke added it here. And, all these people touch the concept that it's hard to really trace the lineage of something like that.
I think that I try to create different chart types, and as I do that, I've done a number of things that I don't think anybody has even come close to touching at this point in terms of innovative chart types, and I don't expect any type of attribution because for the most part, they've existed already. I've been inspired by others to create them, and I just haven't found time to come up with a unique write-up to say, hey, here's how to do it. But I struggle with the idea that people there's no such thing as a new chart type. They've all been created. You have to really go outside the box. Yeah. I think I can, if I wanted to say the stanky cloud plot has been created, that might be new. But that took a lot of thinking about how to come up with something. But they've all been created. What should be attributed is where you got, if you're using a technique behind the scenes, it might be just nice to tell the other authors, hey, thanks for helping me out along the way to come up with this solution. Yeah.
I like what you said, Adam, about the way you kind of described it. I think if I were to play out the way I think about things, and maybe why it's important to do that extra step of attribution in the process of a technique, is this concept of, like, you said that the Sankey diagram, right? Chris Love worked on it, and then Jeffrey did like a riff on it, right? So having the access to those resources to, we always talk about, it's really important to kind of understand what other people are thinking when they go through that process, giving other people that opportunity as well when you go through and build that technique. I think that's probably right where it should be. And then, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, although we're talking about technique versus design, that concept really overlapped, which was claiming to have done something that you didn't do, right?
Yeah.
That's where it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
When someone drops that on their website to say, hey, I'll charge $5 an hour to create a visualization just like this. Yeah. I mean, that's an insult to all of the other people who are doing hard work to come up with something good.
Yeah.
Do you guys get worried that concept of like, hey, I'll for $5 I'll do this, degrades the progress we're making in data visualization and visual communication of analytics?
Never really thought about that.
It happens.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Adam.
I think it's the software Tableau is such an easy tool to use. It's some people use it really well, but I don't think it's a hard tool to learn. And so the barrier to entry in terms of like the learning curve and how hard it is to go from being able to take data and make a visualization is relatively low. And so I understand why there are, more inexpensive options out there in terms of getting resources to build the stuff in. But no, I don't really, again, because I'm not a freelancer, so I don't really think about things like that. But I imagine it's a concern.
There's a lot of people out there who use Tableau, and I've been lucky enough to go halfway around the world to train people to understand their process. And from that, I kind of have a good sense of, I believe, and maybe it's in my head that I have this good sense of where people are at in their skill set. And a Sankey diagram is a long way for some people. So when you see like some crazy innovative stuff, there's only 2 dozen, 5 dozen, 100 people that can do that kind of work. And when you see someone attribute and say, I can do this and I can do it for a low rate, that that's not possible. And I think people would recognize the joke that it becomes when you see something like that, just because the quality is hard to find. I think what I'm trying to say is it's really more about the people and the process rather than the product of, hey, there's this thing, like I can make you this one thing. That's not true. Like there's a lot of time that goes into thinking about how to create something that's amazing, and there's certainly a lot of time that goes into it. So there's going to be some value to it, right? For someone to continue to do that on the freelance side. It's their livelihood. And I think when you see when you go on Fiverr and you see these low dollar amounts associated with a dashboard and it claims to be of a high quality, that's not what you're going to get.
Yeah. I'll play devil's advocate here and say, you, Luke, would know, and maybe you, Adam, would know, and I would know, but some people may not know. I had this interesting experience when I was back in industry where there were a bunch of consultants hired to do something to build a bunch of dashboards, right? And the end result was really a stretch, and not so much from like a design perspective, but from like an analytics perspective of doing things like I put an average line on there and to just put an average line on there, and it's the same height as the bar. Like there's literally no logic to these things. And I will say that kind of two interesting things happened out of there. One was it kind of left a lack of trust for visual analytics, truly, that, hey, this isn't something that is easy to adopt and have someone help me improve on. And then the other one, which was kind of an interesting byproduct, which I think really hurt my particular situation, which I do think was unique, was my manager started to compensate for this poor product that was developed and actually redesigned it for them. And so I think that that's always a concern when you have these situations is I don't want to say ousting, because ousting's, a really rigid term, but drawing awareness to exactly what you said, Luke, that it's not necessarily about the technical, the build, but it is about the people, the process, who it is, and sitting behind that computer that's working with you to build out that tool. And I noticed again that it had a very jarring negative impact, and really made people question if it was the right way to approach analytics, honestly.
When it comes to, when we're talking about anything, when it comes to data visualization or advanced analytics, the craft itself requires tens of thousands of hours in order to become a true expert at it. More than 10,000 hours. We'll talk about that in another podcast, but it takes a lot of time in order to become really great at something. And we can all say that we've put in a ton of time. And I think that a lot of people feel like the shortcuts are, I'm going to do this one or two things and I'm going to copy and emulate exactly what's going on. And that's what it is. It's just a copy.
Yeah. When the person who took my work, when I emailed them, I said, hey, I'm not happy you took my work, blah, blah, blah. And I said, one piece of unsolicited advice is that when you take someone's work and then you get paid to do that work and you can't meet that level, and that's my guess, is this person might be misadvertising, misrepresenting his level of ability. And I said, when that occurs and you can't meet that level of work that you were paid to do, you would then reach out to the community to help you out. And the community would respond by, the same way we respond to anyone, is to help you out and help you troubleshoot and solve it. And I'd be one of the, if he had reached out to me and said, hey, I saw this hurricane viz you made and I need help trying to figure out how to make it, I'd be the first to hopefully respond and say, hey, let me see how I can help you out. But it's bad karma to hurt that same community that would then help you. And so that was my only, sort of my little soapbox that I got on when I did email him. And he didn't really respond very well to that. But I would say that, that's the only thing. I think when you misrepresent yourself, or when you charge a lower dollar figure and you don't meet the expectations of the people that are employing you or hiring you, it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly. And so I don't think you can get away that long by misrepresenting your services and putting out bad work and telling people otherwise.
There is one final question I want to ask, because I think that this is an intersection between the two of you. So if there's something interesting there, we can keep it. So the question is, attribution outside of visualization, outside of Tableau. Adam, you mentioned you do a lot of work in R. What does it look like in a different community? And Luke, I know you do work in R as well. How does that vary from the Tableau community?
Well, I'll start, but in GitHub, and I think this is what a lot of people are looking for, in GitHub, you can borrow code and share code and fork, you can trace back the origins of that code. So through forking and things like that. So I think some folks would like to see Tableau Public go that way, particularly when people are just downloading work, looking at it and then republishing it to their own site just to hold on to it. You don't need to do that in a platform like GitHub. But I will say, borrowing code or taking code, it happens all the time. And it's how 99% of code gets written, is someone has already written it somewhere else. They've shared it on, Stack Overflow or GitHub or wherever, and you borrow it. Some people message that person and say, hey, thank you, I really appreciate it, or email them and say, hey, I need help figuring out why you did this. But the attribution, I don't think, is as big of a deal, because it's going on behind the scenes generally. Now, if you're writing an article about, hey, I built this new type of model and it's built off of the shoulders of other people's work, it is polite and appropriate to, attribute credit. But it's a different beast, I think, with the coding community. But let's see what Luke thinks.
I think you just repeated everything exactly how I would. It comes down, it's the same thing. It's all about GitHub. You can fork everything. I agree completely. It's the same approach. It's going to be traced back to something, and you'd have to do the exact same thing. You'd have to attribute your work and document it and put it in the code and say, hey, this is where I got this from, or here's where the origin of it is. And sometimes you're using an API just from the library that someone's put together. So it becomes a lot easier to document that process when you're actually writing code versus, doing drag and drop technology with Tableau.
Yeah. I think it's, it's the push and pull between art and science community again, which is, where what interests me the most about Tableau is in the art community. If you, steal someone's poetry or writing, or if you copy someone's painting, it's more apparent. It's easy to trace back. It's easy to call people out, and it's more frowned upon. And on the science side, it's everything is collaborative. Everything's built off of everything else, and particularly in coding, I think there are mechanisms to attribute things, but I don't think people are more going to say, hey, this code you stole from blah blah blah, and you need to give him credit. That doesn't occur. That doesn't occur very often, at least not that I've seen.
And that's really interesting. I mean, to me, the way I would summarize what you're saying is like, because data visualization is developing a product, or there is an end result, it falls much more on that art spectrum than anything else. And it almost seems like there's even more emotions to that process of someone stealing, whereas, by your own kind of words, the code could be just part of something, and it's usually part of something much bigger. So it's really interesting to just kind of see how those things play out.
Yeah.
Right. Guys, I have one other thing, because I want to include something positive in here and not be completely a downer, is can we just have like a little discussion on some of the positives of being so open about the work you've done? And Adam, I would ask you directly, are there any memorable people that have reached out to you, or how often do people reach out to you to say, thank you for what you have done, you've inspired me, you've helped me? And you had mentioned, you alluded to, like, if someone gets stuck and maybe they're looking at what I'm doing, or they're doing something similar in inspiration, I'm more than happy to help. Can you kind of just give us a little bit of, depth on that?
Yeah. That happens all the time. And I encourage people to do that more. I mean, reach out to people you see in the community. I reached out to, that's how I got better, is I reached out to Steve Wexler and Jeffrey, and they were super helpful. They were super responsive, and it's only fair that I do the same when people reach out. But I get emails all the time, and people saying like, hey, how do you do this, and how do you do that? And I try to respond to all of them and help them out. But I think that it should occur more often. People might feel a little nervous about doing that, but and it's rewarding. And quite frankly, I see it as my responsibility, my job as in the community to keep doing that and keep sharing information and being responsive when people need help.
I think we sharpened our teeth on what we do by learning from others and learning from the experts, and we pushed ourselves to the edge of what is possible in Tableau and other tools. And I think as a result, we can only do the same for others. Like the generations of developers move very quickly. So like the next up and coming individuals, we definitely want to help out, and only because we owe it to them.
So I encourage people, email me if you have questions, I'm always happy to help people out if they get stuck on something, or trying to reverse engineer something I built or whatever.
I think this has been like a really insightful conversation. Having the conversation increases transparency, and as the transparency gets pushed out there, then it becomes second nature to us in the work that we're doing, that it's like, oh, we should be attributing certain things as we go about it, whether it's a process, a technique, color palette, you name it. Like all of that becomes a lot easier as a result of continuing the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's well stated to say, think of it as part of your learning journey and just sharing that. And then attribution can be something that's baked into the process, and everyone can feel really good about it. All right. Well, thank you, Adam, for being our inaugural guest. It's been an amazing time, and we look forward to seeing more amazing work from you soon, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
hashtag analytics.
A conversation between two people.
We're gonna have to start over.
I do that. I know.
Okay.
I know of Josh.
You know of him. He'll be so excited.